could put your organization or city in your title as well, so we know who's on the line. That'd be super helpful. And then just the other regular Zoom logistics here, to mute yourself when you're not speaking, to limit background noise. And as always, feel free to chat us or raise your hand if you have questions or comments or any challenges as we get going here. This is your Boost team. I'm Melissa Keene, in case I don't know you all, and I'm joined today by our whole team. We have our Executive Director, Erica Manuel, joining us this afternoon, as well as Carly, Kim, Nicole, and Hannah, who I'm sure you all know at this point. If you could go ahead and drop your name and title and organization into the chat box too, so we have a record of who's joining us this afternoon, that would be helpful. We don't usually go around and do full introductions since we only have an hour, and that takes up a lot of time. So just if you could introduce yourself via chat, that would be really helpful. And so to kick us off this afternoon, we've invited, again, Erica, our Executive Director, to share some of our observations as ILG about the challenges and opportunities that you all are facing as a result of this election, and as we go into transitions and priority setting and all of that. So I'm going to turn it over to Erica to just kick us off this afternoon.
Thank you, Melissa. Can everyone hear me? I think I'm lit up with my little yellow box. I am so excited to be here today, participating in this month's Boost Live. I don't always get the opportunity to participate, and so it's really nice to kind of connect with you all at this time of the year. So as Melissa mentioned, I'm Erica Manuel, the CEO and Executive Director of ILG, and it is great to see so many faces on the Zoom line today. Hi, David, who I know, and I see a couple others as well that I've met and have been able to connect with. As Melissa mentioned, this afternoon's Boost Live is a little different than our previous sessions, but no less timely. Our topic this afternoon is actually going to veer a little away from sustainability in the environmental sense, and we're going to talk a little bit more about a sustainability in the local government sense. And as Carly, I think, has mentioned over time, our topic is the recent election and how the lead up, the process, and the results are really affecting local agency leaders. So I think you'll agree that 2020 has been a year like no other. I don't need to tell you that. And it's so funny because it started off with so much promise, right? Then the pandemic meets social unrest, meets wildfires, meets distance learning, meets community division, and then the election mayhem. And then now we're in the stage of COVID infection increases, and we're leading up into a Black Friday with in-store shopping restrictions. So thinking about all of that chaos wrapped into the operational challenges that all of you local governments have had to face over the last 6 to 8 months. You know this, right? You're city leaders. So you started by rapidly transitioning to a virtual workplace where many of your team members or yourself maybe were working from home, but also had kids distance learning at home. And that happened right before you had to navigate the budget process, and you had to project, what sales tax revenues may or may not be, or TOT revenues may or may not be. And then you have to figure out how you're going to maintain operations. You have to think about virtual public engagement, right? Because the rules haven't really changed, just how you go about following those rules, adhering to them, how that changes, right? And honoring that compact that you have with your communities to make sure that they are connected and informed. So thinking about like transparency and equity and the digital divide, all of that took on a whole new meaning and relevance this year. Your social media accounts probably became a lifeblood for your external outreach, right? And then on top of all that, you probably also experienced this never-ending and, let's say, interesting world of governing by Zoom. Your council meetings, your planning discussions, your staff meetings, all of that. And now some of you are probably thinking about the impact of a new mix of elected leaders after a potentially contentious election cycle. How are their priorities going to align with your goals and your plans and your role even, especially those of you in sustainability? Where do you fit in now if that is no longer immediately in the priority list for COVID response, right? Or other disaster resiliency considerations. So there's been a lot, right? That's something you already know. But that's not to say, though, that there haven't been some silver linings. I think you would all agree that old adage that with crisis comes opportunity has probably never been more apparent than it was this year. It certainly was that case for ILG. There was a time when they'd say local government would never have been able to explore a remote work environment. And there were a dozen reasons why people would tell us, especially and usually in IT, but why that couldn't happen. But miraculously, a lot of us have not only survived, but we have thrived, we have innovated, and we've expanded our horizons. And you guys have just done an amazing job. And I think it's so incredible, and it speaks to the resilience and the potential of our local government institutions. So this Boost program is really about sustainability, and it's about capacity building. And ILG, certainly, this entire team has just been honored to help you navigate whatever challenges you've been facing for the past 18 months, before and hopefully after COVID as well. But today's topic's a little different. It does still tie in, I think, when you think about it. If you remember, ILG does 4 main things. We have 4 main areas of work. You're most familiar with the sustainability work that we've been doing, but we also have expertise in leadership and governance and public engagement and civics education and in workforce. And I work with some of you on those areas as well. And today's discussion is going to span a lot of those areas. So I am thankful to have a local government legend with us on the line today, and he also happens to be an ILG board member. His name is Jim Keene. He's been talking about backpacking and a number of other things as we were leading into this conversation. And, you know, Jim's going to be able to provide us hopefully with a little insight on his experience in local government, not just with cities, but also with counties, and just really navigating what has been a career that's been full of what we're experiencing now. Many would say that no one has ever dealt with this kind of, for lack of a better word, chaos, right? The pandemic plus all of the other factors. But there have been times in history when we have experienced these kinds of challenges. And Jim, whether it's his background, like I said, at cities, he was recently the city manager for the city of Palo Alto, but he also has had leadership roles at ICMA and with CSAC. He's very, very connected with public administration at the national level. He's just a really interesting and I think innovative person, and we're so happy to have him. And on a personal note, you may have gotten a hint of this already, but Jim Keene is really one of the most interesting people on the planet. He could probably beat out the world's most interesting man from the commercials, because he just always has something fun, interesting, and insightful to say. And we're super lucky to have Jim on the line today to just give us a little bit of overview of kind of what he's experienced and how that might connect and resonate with what you might be thinking or needing as you lead into 2021 and think about how do we deal with all of this crazy now. So please join me in welcoming Jim Keene.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Do I have to look at myself this whole time?
Well, we could take your image off the screen. I think if we do a non-screen share, right, then you don't have to share.
Okay. I'm a lot shaggier looking right now, like lots of us are, I guess. That's better. I'm talking to you all rather than to myself. Thank you very much. Anyways, it's really nice to be here. You know, I really can't separate talking about even a local election, though, from the larger questions of sustainability, which is, you know, always both about our past and the future that we're trying to create, or the past we're trying to repair. And, you know, we're in this time, though, when we've had this election, and I spent 38 years in local government. I managed mostly as the chief executive. I've been in every kind of community, city and counties, rich, poor, fast growing, built out. I hate to say I've seen it all, but I would say we're all having a Vuja Day experience right now. And if you don't know what Vuja Day is, you know what the experience is. It's the opposite of deja vu. Deja vu is, you know, I feel like I've been here before. Vuja Day is, I don't know where I am and I've never been here before. Okay, so we are in this new environment, or it's a more intense variation of it. And I started writing this piece a while back for Governing about governing in the time of COVID. And I thought, well, that's sort of like Love in the Time of Cholera, if you read that lovely book by the South American writer. And in that book, what the book was really about was what's the underlying emotion in love, that love in the time of cholera. What did cholera represent? Was a kind of passion, a heated passion. Whoa, like that, my goodness. You guys still there? Woo. You there?
We are here.
Yeah, we're here. You okay?
Just got too passionate on us, Jim.
I had a little earthquake here. All of my stuff fell down on me. Okay, good. I'm back. Anyway, passion. So I was trying to think, what's the underlying emotion in a time of COVID or something? And I started thinking about, oh, maybe it's guilt of some sort. And that's not exactly the right emotion to think about. But when you peel this back, you realize, well, we've brought this on ourselves one way or another for lots of different reasons, whether it's hunting and capturing wild animals and selling them for food in the Far East, which we shouldn't be doing as human beings in the first place, to how we travel or how we haven't managed this environment. And underlying all of this is the sense that we are responsible for this situation. And it's also a sort of warm-up act in a lot of ways, as difficult as it is for all of the kinds of disruptive things we're going to be facing due to climate change and these other issues in the world, right? I mean, I don't know where I am, and I've never been quite here before. The closest I can think of this myself was in the late 60s when I was a rather radical college student in those times, and the world felt really torn apart and divided. But, you know, I think I feel in this time we're as close to 1860 as we've ever been in this country, and sort of what was the lead up to the Civil War. What we had these intractable kind of positions, competing visions about the future, old ways of life that were actually not working, and dramatic changes taking place in other parts of the country with rapid industrialization, immigration, all of those things led us to the biggest crisis that we had in our country, the Civil War. And I think many people would say this election feels as close to that time as any election we've been through in our history. And not just the election, what is all of this stuff that is happening? Now, one of the things in my travels as a manager, and you all have, in order to be successful in your communities, you have to really be a lot like the community you serve. And you have to adopt the language and the customs of the place, even if you're from somewhere else. My kids used to always joke about this. They would say, Dad's such a chameleon. Wherever he goes, those are his people, right? Well, because you have to become like the people you serve. So when I was in Berkeley as city manager, it was really important for me to quote Marx and Hegel, for example, in order to be relevant to the left-wing revolutionaries on the city council. And there were two things that I heard from both Marx and Hegel that I think are appropriate even right now. First of all, Karl Marx and Richard Rodriguez, the essayist, turned me on to this, wrote in 1850, he said, for the first time the world meets in California. He was writing about the gold rush. For the first time the world meets. Never before in human history, so many people from so many different places around the world converge in this spot in this very short period of time. And you all, if you really ever read the history of the gold rush, you sort of understand how wild and crazy and difficult and amazing and everything else that it was. Well, that's been the history of California ever since, right? The world meeting here. And now that's a history of every place else. So the world is meeting and is going to continue to meet itself. And we're going to run into situations from people who are ready to meet and accept that, and people who are overwhelmed by it and want to go back to some other time when it wasn't so complicated, or there weren't all these strangers. The second thing was from Hegel, who wrote in the 1840s, and he was asked about the American democratic experiment, and he said, we won't really know if the American democratic experiment has worked until the frontier has so completely collapsed in the United States that the Americans are compelled to fall back in upon each other. This is what's happening right now, right? We're falling back in upon each other in the face of a very dynamic, changing future. you deal with this in sustainability all the time, all of the implications of the issues we deal with, energy use and carbon and sea level rise and movement of people around the world and all of these things that are spilling out because of these things, has just created this really challenging situation. A housing developer in Berkeley, one of the few people who successfully actually built anything in Berkeley while I was there, gave me a book back 20 some years ago called The Future and Its Enemies. And it really deals with the tension between dynamism and stasis. The people who are adaptable and ready to sort of look at how we move with the future, and those of us, and we're all combinations of all of this, and your city councils are combinations, or your boards are combinations of people who want to go ahead and embrace the tension of what's happening, the disruption of what's happening, and people who want to turn away from it and somehow go back to where we are. So here's what happens in all of these. And the difficulty with city council or board elections is that there's exceedingly important events that take place in a short period of time. But for most of us, we have a career of work that in many ways has a long-term view. You're out here to really serve the world or change the world, not to just necessarily make your governing body happy in the moment. And yet you're required to be able to do that. One, that's because that's part of our job. And two, that's what we have to do to be able to be effective. When I was in Palo Alto once, I was being interviewed for a magazine, and I said, well, you know, I don't really care too much what's happening at the state and the federal level. I mean, it's pretty irrelevant to me as a city manager. I'm much more likely to talk to somebody in the mayor's office in Barcelona, Spain, than I am to my federal representatives. Because that's where the issues are taking place. That's where the learning's taking place. That's where we're driving the changes. I feel differently about that now. I've never again felt that, oh my goodness, we are nested truly within this federal system that is very imperfect. We are a United States. We realize in a way that we never did before, our disunited states. We're not a unified country. And the fact that we're individual states is even more and more relevant. I mean, to be honest with you, I've thought, geez, you know, the West Coast ought to secede. I mean, it's the way the Electoral College is set up. The compromise, when we adopted the Constitution, the Connecticut Compromise, it said, boy, in order to get a Constitution, we're going to have to give 2 senators to every state. So somebody in Wyoming's vote for senator is worth 66 or 70 times more than somebody's vote in California is. I mean, it's a really imperfect system. And yet the imperfections of that system now are, I think, impacting us directly at the local level and even influencing local politics in a way that I've never seen before. So never seen before, the polarization. Now, here's the other problem, and I'm going to tell you guys stuff you probably know, but just years of this experience. Here's one of the difficulties with local governing bodies. First of all, we're very close to the people. We are the most trusted level of government of all the levels of government. That still doesn't mean we're that effective. And here's one of the challenges for being on a city council. And once I hired a friend to come in and do this work when I was in Tucson as city manager, and I ultimately had to fire the consultant because one of my council members led a rebellion against what we were trying to do with them. But he was telling it, he said, look, here's the thing. There's no requirement to be a city council member or a member of a board of supervisors. There's no job description for it, really. All you have to do is be eligible to run for office and be able to get elected. You may bring skills, but you don't have to have any. You understand that? All of you have professional job descriptions. You have to have a kind of demonstrated competency, but to be elected, you don't have to have anything other than be elected, number one. Number two, there's really no hierarchy on a council or a governing board. I mean, even if you have a board chairman or you rotate the mayor, for the most part, their vote is no more powerful than somebody else's vote. And it's just their ability or everybody's ability to work with each other. So no hierarchy. Third, you basically have to do everything in public. I mean, everything meaningful. So it's extremely difficult. You have to be really skilled and mature and sophisticated in a lot of ways to do in public and work through issues with people you you may not have agreements with or understanding, you may not have competencies in an issue. And so it's such a hard job. It's such a hard, difficult job that in many ways, in my experience, governing bodies have not been able to sustain really forward-thinking, deep, committed work on big issues for an extended period of time. You either have a change in the governing body or people want to just gravitate to the biggest issue of the moment. And I used to tell council members, I said, we don't really have, you're an elected representative, but we really run our meetings like town meetings, where it's almost direct democracy. The problem is it's a different town that shows up every week. So you make a decision and one group of people are in the room and you say, yeah, okay, we're going to do that. And then suddenly the next week, as we know, this is all public engagement 101, other people hear about it and they say, oh my God, I don't believe you made that decision. They come to the next meeting and they say, you need to reverse the direction that you took. So the ability to work in a sustained manner is really, really difficult. And I don't know how many of you are the city manager or the chief administrative officer, but what has happened over time is that job has had to get more and more involved with the city council or the governing body in order to be effective. And that's required it's called minding the gap between the manager having to spend so much time in the political realm a lot of times that the staff has to do much, much more overall leadership of the organization. So what you're going to achieve on sustainability, or what you're going to achieve on what you want to do on economic or social justice, or how you want to transform your organization, is things that has to be distributed across the organization now in ways that they never were 25 years ago. And to be a really good city or county manager, you've got to actually be really willing to risk yourself every day in your job by trying to interface with the council to have them, pay attention to the biggest issues of the time. So just one last example, I'll give you one that everybody would be dealing with, and it'll still be operative. In Palo Alto, we had a huge issue constantly of too much business development and concern and the impacts on that, and not enough housing, and certainly no affordable housing, no the ability to afford housing. And yet it was extremely difficult to get anybody to build housing, really, because there were lots of folks who were resistant to seeing their lifestyle change, even though everybody was pro-immigrant, so to speak, except, well, not necessarily immigrants coming into lots of people who want to come into town, or I don't want to see my life changed. So all of those things are normally difficult. Now we have all of these triage problems of how do we get through COVID? How do we manage our financing? How do we get back on track? And then we still have to turn back to all of these big systems issues we've got. What are we really going to do about saving the climate? What are you going to do about sea level rise in a meaningful way? And my biggest concern is that we have to be working through triage, you guys do right now, taking care of nitty gritty details. How do we keep some essential services going? How do we get some grants? And yet that is, I hate to say it, but that's almost make ready work for the real work that ultimately then has to take place to deal with these really big issues we have. So all I'm saying is this is absolutely the worst of times to be in the position that you're in many ways. It really is. And the only thing I would leave you with is this, and when I was in Tucson, we used to say this, I said, look, if it wasn't this difficult, they wouldn't need us. And all the easy crap has been done. So the world is in your hands right now. I would just ask you to do one thing. Do everything you can to not get distracted by the immediacy of the triage efforts we have. Secondly, don't get seduced into thinking that there is a return to normal that can take place, because it really can't. We've got to go beyond that, getting back to normal, to the place we need to be for the future. And that's going to mean you're going to have to advance leadership questions and demands ultimately to the governing body that more likely than not is going to have tremendous difficulty in being able to swallow that on top of everything else. So God bless you guys. Thank you for doing the work. And I'm actually happy I'm not in your shoes right now.
Thank you, Jim. Everyone, please give a virtual maybe round of applause for Jim and his insights today. I know we have a time for a few questions, and while we're getting those queued up, Jim, one for you, based on what you've said, which you set this really incredible stage and talked about, you know, these last few tips kind of for how people can approach the next couple of months or years, right? It could take a while. What would you suggest, you know, as we're trying to operationalize your recommendations, how would you recommend that some of these leaders not maybe go on the weeds and actually do the hard work of strategic planning? How would you suggest they really do that while still minding the shop? And then also, what opportunities do you see for innovation? I mean, I think you have the opportunity to step back in your lovely Pacific Northwestern home now and see what, you know, you're not in the fray anymore. Do you see opportunities for this group to innovate? You know, as I mentioned in the intro, crisis and innovation come hand in hand. And you've been in this space a while, and you said we can't have that same normal. So what do you see the new normal could be, and how do you think that could be a good thing?
Well, so first of all, I mean, one always has to be opportunistic in your environment. So it doesn't mean you can do everything that you want to do under any situation. You know, we're always working with other people. That's one of my first leadership lessons. There are other people in the world, right? You go, my God, that's really tough. It was so easy until I realized there were other people I had to work with. Well, that's the essence of our work. And as Marty Linsky at Harvard best described it, he said, leadership is about disappointing your followers at a pace they can absorb. Leadership is about disappointing your followers at a pace they can absorb. So when you're thinking about innovation or how you move forward, you have to realize you can't go faster than the ability of your community or your environment to ultimately assimilate it. And yet you've got to find that right tension, you know, almost like in endurance sports or anything where you're trying to build strength. You kind of push beyond where you can go, you get a little extra capacity, and then you're stronger, and then you go more. You've got to pace it. But you all, here's the innovation that has to take place. I think all of the work that has to take place now is at the deepest human level. There's no technology other than the technology of what it means to be a human being alive in this life with other human beings on this planet in this environment. And all of us have got to really also invest in ourselves in this work in order to sustain ourselves in this difficult work.
Thank you for that, Jim.
No, I mean, you know, there's no outside sort of thing that has to happen. This is heartbreaking work that you guys are doing, right? I've told everybody who came to work for us ever, you need to be prepared to have your heart broken every day in this work. Because if your heart isn't getting broken, you're doing work that you don't care about. And if you care about it, you're going to be disappointed because you can't go faster than the environment will allow you to do it. And yet you've got to keep pushing, but you have to have a way to sustain yourself. So you have to have company like this. You have to build relationships in ways, sometimes outside of your organization, to be supported by people, because sometimes you can't have conversations in your own organization or the same you can have with peers and others. You've got to build a support network that can support you for being able to speak truth to the world. And you guys have got to do this.
So we've got a related question that just came into the chat for you, Jim. Do you have any tips or ideas or thoughts on how to engage a very distracted public right now, obviously, in important things like long-range planning? So how do you keep their focus on important city matters when there's so much other noise happening in the world right now?
Well, nobody in the public is interested in long-range planning. I mean, I don't even know what it is. I mean, long-range planning for what? I mean, I might be interested in an issue, and therefore you make the case, which is why we're either, our gods are too small, as Peter Block used to tell me. Jim, your gods are too small. You know, we have to, if you want to engage people in this, you have to make it personally meaningful for them as to why it matters. And some of the ways to do this is to make everything more personal as best as you can. So let's take the issue on sustainable issues, right? A lot of times you start to everybody go, God, this is really difficult. This is going to be impossible to do. What do you do? And then you start playing the odds for yourself and you go, like, I can do this now. I go, oh, well, before the avocado really hits the fan in the future, it's okay. I'll probably be dead. And then I think, oh, well, wait a minute. I have like children. Oh, wait, I have granddaughters. So when my first granddaughter, Sasha, was born 10 years ago, my daughter sent me a little wave file of her heartbeat and a sonogram of her in the womb. And so I kept that little wave file for a long time, and I called it the sound of the future. Because every time I would start thinking about this is too big or this is too difficult, when I would think, you know what, all of our models in the Bay Area are going to show we're going to have serious sea level rise by 2050, which is mean we're going to have to abandon most of the new Silicon Valley that has been built inside 101 on the west side of the bay in the wetlands, because it's been easy to build there because there weren't a lot of neighbors there, and yet it's going to flood. And it can't be solved without a regional and large scale solution, of which there is none. And there's 30 years till that's going to happen. Well, my daughter, Sasha, will be 40 in 30 years, right? So suddenly I go, this is an immediate problem. So when we engage with people in the community, we have to think about how we put it in as personal terms as possible. And a lot of it has to do with bringing the future. And this is one of a public professional's biggest job, is to always speak for the people who or represent the views of people who are not in the room. And one of the groups that is not in the room is the future, is hardly ever in the room. And so you have to bring people's grandchildren into the room in some way. And it's hard to do that because you guys are not trained to speak in, but we're supposed to be bureaucrats and speak in kind of dead language that, of course, nobody wants to hear. Nobody wants to read the strategic plan with S1-4B.
Yeah.
I mean, it's necessary for us to do the work, but that's not what the work is.
Yeah. Hey, Jim, we have a couple questions, and I'm going to ask Marcella if you're open to it, to unmute yourself and ask Jim your question, which was great. Marcella's out of El Centro, and she's got some questions about new council members.
Yes. Marcella, you're unmuted.
Actually, she's got two lines. Let's see. One's unmuted, the other is not. We'll give her a second.
Okay, there we go. Can you hear me now? I think I unmuted successfully now.
Hi.
Thank you, Thank you, Mr. Keene, for your words and your wisdom. So I felt that it was fitting for me to ask you that, given the environment that we're in, and I really liked what you said about what it takes to become an elected official. And sometimes, you know, we get elected officials that perhaps, you know, maybe are not as informed as maybe they should. So given the dynamics of what we're dealing with right now in our current situation, what advice would you have for those cities that maybe are getting some new council members?
Mhm. Well, I will tell you things that we did over the years in lots of different places that I worked, and none of them worked optimally or completely, you know? I mean, they would work partially. So first of all, when people were running for office, always, just even before the election, we always did in-depth briefings for candidates and introduced different staff people to all of the candidates and trying to give them both as much of a sense as, you know, how open and transparent we were, blah, 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 all of those sorts of things. And to treat everybody equally. Secondly, once the council, let's say the new council is seated, we've always tried to have initial, you know, council priority setting and council effectiveness building retreats. And these are what I say, these things have worked sometimes better than others. You often have the issue of a rogue council member, right, who just wants to be, there's a lot of power in being the dissenting rogue voice. Even if you're not ultimately effective, you know, you get a lot of press and attention and all of those sorts of things. But I think the most important thing is to really try to bring in some expertise to help you really to confront what I said. Tell them what a hard job it is. You've got to do this in public. You know, there's not hierarchy. You all have equal, believe it or not, you're all equal. Nobody has any more votes than anybody else. And everything you're going to do has to be done collectively. And because it's hard to do collectively, that's why people start doing stuff on their own, either getting attention on their own, or if you have districts, wanting to just serve your district rather than the city as a whole. So you've got to make every effort that you can to bring people on board. I will tell you, even in the most sophisticated places I've worked, we've never had as strong a team building as I think we should have had. But they are more effective at being able to ultimately move beyond just the interpersonal stuff and how to work together to at least setting priorities. And I would say you have to do that. And then lastly, it's sort of like being married, right? You know, you just have to work at it every day, the whole term, you know.
I love it.
You give up.
That's true.
Talking to them, sharing information, pushing them, all those things.
Building those relationships too, I would imagine, making sure that there's trust there at the staff level with the electeds as well to try and get that work done. Thank you, Jim. We do have, and Marcella, for your question, we do have a question from David Loya as well. David, did you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, and then we'll move into the rest of the program?
Hi, David.
Hey, James, thanks. A quick logistical note before we jump into David's question. Since we've got a smaller group than normal, I think we're just obviously going to keep together in this big group discussion instead of going into breakout. So if you guys have questions for Jim after David goes, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask questions. Or we'd also love to hear from you all in terms of what challenges or concerns or opportunities you're seeing as you navigate this. So we'll just kind of keep this in a more free-flowing, bigger discussion this time so that we can keep this going. So sorry to interrupt. David, please jump in.
Hey, you Arcata guys, I used to love going up there to the kinetic sculpture race and stuff. So nice. I thought there'd be a beached, you know, vehicle there behind you in the sand or something.
Just my dog. Yeah, thanks for the talk. It was really, you know, a lot of what you said really rang true for me in my experience in public service. But I was inspired to ask a question because of what you just said about, you know, planning for the future. One of the ironies, I work in community development, we do planning and the long range planning work that Dila was talking about earlier. One of the ironies to me is that, you know, you'll be in a public hearing and one of the first things that people queue up as if to establish their credentials for the weight, the gravity of their public comment is, hi, my name is David Loya, and I've lived in Arcata for 20 years. And
Yes.
so my opinion matters.
Yes.
And oftentimes we are, with planning these long range planning works that we're doing, we're planning for a population that's not here right now and trying to move the needle on changing the built environment when, even if it looks completely run down, we have plenty of areas in town and it's my town, I love it, and I can bag on it. So I'm just going to tell you, there's areas that are run down that need help, but people get really attached to those areas. So one of my favorite things right now, one of my tactics, in order to build that relationship and make sure that everybody realizes we're working on the same team, is to blame the state. State's making us do this, so we got to do it in our own image. So let's work together to get it done in our own image.
Mm-hmm.
Another thing is, as you mentioned, trying to point to relationships that they have and trying to ensure that they're thinking about do I want a place for my children to live nearby, that sort of thing. But I was just wondering if you have any other strategies that you use to really build that rapport and bring people along with sort of these hard conversations about how their community is changing around them.
Mm-hmm. Well, so I think it's always such an awkward position as a staff person, right? Because you're, as a professional, you have a responsibility and have an expertise, and you have to deploy that, and yet, so much of the time, conversations are much more effective between one citizen and another citizen, or one citizen group and another citizen group, right? So you've got to build relations with other people and be a convener, of meetings or situations or environments that bring different people and different voices and perspectives together. I've worked in towns, like you said, that do that, where people pull that stunt. I know they're proud, but it's a little off-putting to somebody else. It almost sort of says, hey, dude, if you just got here last year, don't plan on getting up here to talk because you haven't been here long enough, right? But you always have these opportunities to make a point. A number of years ago, the Martin Prosperity Institute, which is Richard, the Rise of the Creative Class author and stuff, they did they named Palo Alto the most livable city in the country in their first survey. And so I got calls from Boulder and Durham, North Carolina, and a number of other places congratulating us that we were number one. I said, yeah, it is. We're the number one city in the most livable city in the country, except for the fact that nobody can afford to live here. And I would say this in meetings. I said, you really say this, but you all know this. This is a city that your children can never live in. And what will happen is, and this is what I want to go to the personal, because the public, or some voices in the community will always make things so big that they can't be solved, so you don't have to deal with them, right? Which is, why should we build a lot more housing? That really can't do anything to really solve the housing crisis in the Bay Area. I said, what do you think you can do here? I said, and we turn around, I would say in Palo Alto, I said, we're not going to solve the housing crisis. We're just going to do our part, but more importantly, we're going to give some other people the opportunity to have the Palo Alto experience and live here like you had when you were welcome to this town 40 years ago. That's what we're doing. We just want 200 more people who can do that. We want some more people whose kids can maybe go to Palo Alto high schools and get a great education. We're not trying to solve everything. And that's why I think you always have to come back and be personal. And again, it sort of throws people off too, because we're supposed to be technocrats, right? this is why we never work, we never succeed. We're in a public meeting and you're doing your professional job and you've got all of your PowerPoints and all of a sudden some little old lady and, you know, in her mucking boots walks up to the thing and it says, and tells some story about how this thing didn't work. And your whole presentation is like shot, you know, her story overrid your PowerPoint. And then you say, well, wait a minute, I have one more PowerPoint slide I can show and we can win. No, you haven't won. We've lost already. So local government people need to be better storytellers too, and need to be issuing invitations to participate. When I was in Flagstaff a long time ago, I was county manager there and we were doing a regional plan. And, you know, I sort of forced my way in as a county manager and said, we can't plan this region just individually as a city. We need to do a collective thing. And as far as engagement, we need to provide limitless, unlimited opportunities for people to not participate, right? Because this is the problem, is how you do get people to actually participate. Anyway, long answer, but you know, you have to cultivate champions in your own community. I'll just say one last thing. When I was in Berkeley, I had a partnership between myself, Richard Register, who was Eco City Berkeley, was a radical environmentalist from the 60s, and one of the Bay Area's micro housing developers. And the three of us worked together. One would speak to the business group, one would speak to the you know, super NIMBY ecologists on stuff, and then myself would be the facilitator of whatever it is that they could sort of speak to that we could do in the middle. That's how we changed the height limits in Berkeley and some of those things at that time, but not us engaging community members. But it's dangerous because, you know, the councils don't like you being too active in the community also, really. I mean, they want you to show up at stuff, but it's dangerous. I mean, when I was in Tucson once, a couple of the council members said, he is fair game for us to get anytime we want because he's put himself out there as an advocate to the community as a whole. He's acting, you know, outside of his sandbox, so he's fair game. I never got fired though.
That's the best takeaway, right? All of this advice and he never got.
You want to do everything you have to do to get. Actually, I'm sorry to do this. A funny joke. Once in Berkeley, one of my council members turned to me once. She said, "Jim, how can you deal with this council? It's the most dysfunctional, mean-spirited, awful governing body in the world." And I said, "Well, Polly," I said, "I don't know. I figure the worst thing that happens is I get fired." And she says, "No, it isn't. The worst thing that happens is you don't get fired."
Well, thank you for that and appreciate the humor infused there. We started on a little bit of a somber note with all of the challenges. So appreciate the humor and all of the comments, Jim. Just a couple of quick closing comments, and then we might have time for one final question. But since we kind of threw our game plan out the window here, I will share some resources with you all in the follow-up email from the League and from ICMA and from ILG that kind of speak to Marcella's question a little bit in terms of how do you orient new board members and council members and get them up to speed and things like that. So we'll share some resources with you in the follow-up email there. And then just want you all to stay tuned for our final Boost Live in December. We're hoping to have a conversation to kind of wrap up the grant and hear from you all what worked, what we could potentially do better with future technical assistance opportunities and things like that. So we hope you'll join us in December for that conversation as well. But if there's any final questions or comments for Jim, we do have a few minutes here before we need to wrap up and get you guys on with your evening. So any other comments or questions? I don't see anything, but Jim, take it away. You might be raising your hand.
Well, yeah, so my fate is in your guys' hands now, right? I'm not shaping anything other than maybe writing or speaking a little bit, not actually doing anything. And I mean, these are really critical times. I mean, this is a very difficult inflection point for our nation, the world, right? The issues that we have are just going to intensify. You have to agree. I mean, a lot of good things are happening too, because I mean, things are coming to a head in ways that they couldn't even see the light of day in the past, right? So we've, you know, ICMA is writing rewriting the whatever, the effective local government manager or local government of the future or something. And so I've been giving them some help with that. And they were asked, what do you think of the two biggest forces facing local government managers in the next 10 years? And I said, well, I think there's two. There's disruption, continuous disruption, and there's reconciliation. These are the two biggest forces I think that are in play, which is everything's going to continue to be disruptive, and we're going to lose our bearings, whether it's a pandemic, whether it's emergent voices that have been stifled from speaking or living, who are not going to be silent anymore, whether it is disruptive social media. Have you guys watched The Social Dilemma yet, that documentary? Okay, so our ability to even understand reality is going to be so challenged in the future, and the consequences of, you know, all of these things. There's no escape from anything. There's no escape from anything. There will be mass movements of people around this world as climate change and other factors just really, really disrupt. If you think it's good where you are, well, it's going to be bad somewhere else, and nobody's going to stay put. We've always moved. So it's really, really difficult. So in the face of disruption, what is our response? I mean, disruption's inevitable. Reconciliation is the attitude that I think that we all have got to adopt and become practiced and skilled at. How do we reconcile these competing differences? How do we reconcile the damage we've done to the planet with our industry and our economy and our lifestyle? How do we reconcile the suffering that we've imposed for hundreds or thousands of years upon fellow human beings? I mean, these are really, really big things that are, and it all happens in a real place, face to face, with what a town and a city is. It's not some abstract concept. It's a real place with real people. And you know, you get to confront and do your best to reconcile all of these difficulties for the future. It's that big. And you have to do it. You have to do it. One of the things that the ILG is really known for was its pioneering work in ethics. And the older I get, the more I realize that ethics is actually sort of at the root of everything we ultimately have to do as human beings. And I'm not just talking ethics about don't break the law and stuff, or even behavior. Ethics in the sense that these are the agreements about how we're going to live together effectively and productively as human beings. Ethics is in the realm of how we live together. It's about principle, but it's also about compassion and understanding, because all of those things are necessary to be able to live. And I would urge you guys, you feel this way in your heart, and you think about this, but I would urge you to bring this vernacular and vocabulary more directly into your work. People will listen to you more when you drop that technocratic stuff and just, speak human being to human being and listen human being to human being. I mean, there are good reasons of people who resist changes. Why? Of course, they're fearing loss. People don't dislike change. They just dislike loss or, so if you show them what they can gain and how to do it and pace, anyway, I'm kind of rambling, but the work is so big, it's in your guys' hands. And Eric Schmidt, the Google former exec and stuff, tweeted something a few weeks ago, interesting about nominate some of the best leaders of cities. It was interesting what he said. Somebody sent it to me. So here's this really successful guy. He said, managing or leading a city is the most difficult work in the world. It's a decentralized, fragmented environment with nonstop systems problems. You don't get to, even Apple just has about 8 products, right? Your town has 400 products or services or issues, and so it is really big work that you have to do. Make it big, and keep it big and give it everything you can and speak directly to it and build strong relationships with other people and take care of yourselves as best as possible in it. So.
Jim, thank you so much.
Sorry, go ahead, Erica.
No, you're good. You're good. I'll let Melissa close it out. Thank you so much, Jim, so much.
Yeah, I just want to echo Erica's thank you. Really appreciate all of your insight and sharing your expertise with our booth communities this afternoon, this evening. I guess technically it's dark outside now. But really appreciate your thoughts around personalizing both the community engagement and the work. And I'm going to take some of that back with me into our public engagement work as tips for how to better engage with the communities that we work with. So hopefully you all found some nuggets of that you'll take back to your communities as well. And just please join me in thanking Jim for his thoughts and comments this afternoon. And we hope to see you all at our next booth live. And we'll probably talk to you before that. So have a good evening, everybody.
All right, my granddaughters are counting on you guys.
Thank you, Jim.
Thanks, Jim.
No pressure.
Bye.
Bye.
Have a good evening.
Watch the power of host.
This was amazing. This thing
Wow.
fell off of my, I don't know what I was doing. I wasn't rocking. It was crazy. Yeah, didn't break.
Can we
though.
stop the recording, whoever's recording?
I have no power.